Bible stories. Moses, David, Daniel, Jesus, Noah. Welcome to my channel.
A woman's weathered hands pour oil into a clay lamp at twilight. The flame catches small, defiant against the encroaching darkness. Her fingers tremble as she steadies the vessel, and for a moment the only sound is the whisper of wind through tent canvas. She stands in the doorway, silhouette framed against the dying light, her veil pulled tight against the desert cold. Her eyes fix on the horizon where years ago a man named Abraham stood and made promises that would shake nations. But you've never heard her name in Sunday school. Genesis mentions her in a single verse, almost an afterthought, a footnote in the grand narrative of patriarchs and covenants. Abraham took another wife whose name was KETURAH. 6 sons, a handful of words, then silence. Why does Scripture nearly erase the woman who stood beside the father of nations in his final years? What secret did KETURAH carry that the biblical writers could barely whisper? And why does her silence hold the key to understanding God's scandalous mercy, the kind that refuses to fit inside our categories of worthy and unworthy, chosen and forgotten? In the next minutes, you'll discover the hidden story that changes everything you thought you knew about covenant, rejection, and the God who writes the forgotten into his eternal plan. Because KETURAH's story isn't just history, it's prophecy, and it's for you. If you're ready for a story, Scripture hid in plain sight, subscribe and turn on the bell. Hebron, 20 years after Sarah's death, the marketplace hums with the familiar rhythm of commerce, merchants calling out prices, the bleat of goats, the sharp scent of cumin and coriander mixing with dust. But when KETURAH passes through, the rhythm breaks. Conversations pause since his eyes follow her with a mixture of curiosity and contempt. She walks with the bearing of someone who has learned not to apologize for existing. Her features mark her as Canaanite, darker skin, the high cheekbones of a people Israel has been taught to keep at arm's length. The fragrant oils she sells carry the scent of foreign lands, of incense burned in temples Abraham's God would never enter. She is other. She has always been other. Her stall sits at the edge of the market, neither fully inside the community nor completely outside it. She arranges her wares with practiced hands. Small clay vessels of mere frankincense speak on it. These are burial oils, anointing oils, oils for moments when the sacred and the human touch. People buy from her because they need what she sells, not because they want to know her name. A shadow falls across her table. She looks up to see a man in the plain garments of Abraham's household. His face is weathered, his eyes careful. He doesn't speak immediately, as if weighing each word before releasing it into the air. The patriarch requests your presence. His voice is low, meant only for her ears. He wishes to speak of a covenant. The word hangs between them like something holy and dangerous at once. KETURAH's hands still over the vessel. She was arranging a covenant. Abraham, 140 years old, father of Isaac, bearer of the promise that would birth nations, seeking counsel from her. The absurdity of it steals her breath. When she manages this evening before sunset, the servant's eyes flick to the crowd, checking who might be listening. Come to the eastern entrance quietly. He leaves before she can ask the questions multiplying in her mind. The marketplace, which had paused when she arrived, now erupts with whispers. They heard. Of course they heard. In a community this small, secrets last about as long as morning dew. A concubine's ambition. Someone mutters just loud enough to carry Sarah's memory defiled before her bones are cold. Another voice adds, sharp with judgment. KETURAH keeps her hands steady, continues arranging her oils. She has learned that dignity is sometimes the only weapon available to the powerless, but inside her heart hammers against her ribs. She knows what they're thinking because she's thinking it too. Abraham belongs to Isaac, to the promise, to Sarah's legacy, his covenant personified. The man who walked away from everything because God said go. What could he possibly want with a Canaanite widow selling burial spices at the market's edge? The afternoon stretches long and hot. She sells nothing. No one approaches her stall. It's as if the servants' words have drawn a circle around her, marking her as contaminated before anything has even happened. Isaac's servants pass by with deliberate distance, their eyes sliding away when she tries to meet them. The message is clear. You are not wanted here. And if you had any sense, you would leave before you make this worse. But KETURAH doesn't leave. She closes her stall as the sun begins its descent, packing her oils with the same careful attention she gives everything. Her hands don't shake. She won't give them that satisfaction. She returns to a small dwelling, a modest structure on the outskirts of Hebron. Neither tent nor proper house, as if even her home can't decide what it is. Inside, she lights a lamp and retrieves something she hasn't looked at in years. A scrap of papyrus worn soft at the edges from handling. The ink faded, but still legible. It's a fragment of a conversation she overheard decades ago when she first came to Hebron. She'd been selling oils near Abraham's camp, close enough to hear, but invisible enough to be ignored. Sarah's voice had carried through the tent walls, sharp with a pain that transcended words. Send Hagar away. My son will not share inheritance with that woman's son. KETURAH traces the words she copied that night, trying to understand what drove her to preserve them. That woman, not Hagar, not even the Egyptian, just that woman. As if naming her would give her too much substance, too much reality, and Abraham had obeyed. The story was told and retold in the marketplace. How the patriarch had sent his concubine and her son into the wilderness with nothing but bread and a skin of water. How God had saved them. Yes, but only after they'd been expelled, erased, removed from the narrative of promise. KETURAH knows what it means to be that woman. She has always known. As twilight deepens, she makes her way to Abraham's camp. The eastern entrance is quieter, away from the main traffic of servants and livestock. A different servant waits there. Older, his face kind in a way that surprises her. He gestures for her to follow and leads her through passages between tents until they reach one set slightly apart from the others. The servant pulls back the entrance flap and KETURAH steps inside. Abraham sits on a low cushion, his body bent with age, but his eyes still sharp, still carrying that strange quality of someone who has seen beyond the veil of ordinary existence. He looks at her and she has the unsettling sensation of being fully seen, not assessed, not judged, but witnessed in a way that makes her want to weep and run in equal measure. KETURAH, he speaks her name as if it matters, as if it carries weight in the economy of heaven. Sit, please. She lowers herself onto the cushion across from him, her hands folded in her lap. The silence stretches, but it isn't uncomfortable. It's the silence of someone gathering words that are too large for easy speech. Finally, Abraham speaks. You know why I sent for you? It isn't a question, but she shakes her head anyway. I know what the marketplace thinks. I don't know what you think. A slight smile touches his weathered face. The marketplace thinks I'm a foolish old man reaching for comfort in my final years. They think I want a concubine to ease my loneliness. He pauses and the smile fades. They're wrong. Then what do you want? You are not to be my concubine, KETURAH. His voice is steady, each word deliberate. You are to be my wife. The tent seems to contract around her wife. Not Hagar's humiliation, not the subordinate status of a secondary woman brought in to serve the primary narrative. Full covenant status, legal standing, a position that would place her at least in form beside Sarah's memory. Why, the question escapes before she can stop it. Why me? Why now? I am Canaanite. I am everything your God told you to separate from. I am you are the woman. I should have had the courage to honor 30 years ago. Abraham's voice cracks and she sees it. Then the weight he's been carrying, the guilt that has aged him beyond his years. When I sent Hagar away, I told myself it was obedience. God had said Isaac was the son of promise and Sarah couldn't bear the division, couldn't live with a constant reminder that I had hedged my bets, that I hadn't trusted God enough to wait. So I sent them into the wilderness. I gave them bread and water and told myself it was mercy. His hands gnarled and spotted with age clench into fists. But it wasn't obedience, KETURAH, it was fear. Fear of conflict, fear of complexity, fear that God's promise was too fragile to survive the mess of human relationships. And I have lived with that fear for decades, watching it poison everything it touched. KETURAH finds her voice. But God saved them. Hagar and Ishmael, they survived. He became a great nation just as God promised. Yes, Abraham meets her eyes. God saved them despite me, not because of me. He kept his word even when I failed to keep mine. But that doesn't erase what I did. It doesn't undo the violence of being disposable, of being told you matter only until you become inconvenient. The words land on her chest like stones. She thinks of every time someone looked through her instead of at her. Every transaction conducted with the minimum necessary acknowledgement of her humanity. She thinks of the careful distance she has learned to maintain. The way she makes herself small so as not to threaten, not to intrude, not to demand more space than she's been given. You still haven't told me why, she says quietly. Why marry me? Why not just make reparations to Hagar's memory some other way? Abraham leans forward and she sees tears tracking down his weathered face. Because you will bear sons, KETURAH, and I will send them away from Isaac as I sent Ishmael. The land promise goes to Isaac. That's settled. That's clear. But this time, his voice breaks completely now. This time I will bless them before they go. This time I will give them gifts, provision, my name, and my public acknowledgement. This time I will do what I should have done when Ishmael left. I will prove that being sent is not the same as being discarded, that the promise can be specific without requiring everyone else to be erased. KETURAH stares at him, this ancient man whose mistakes have been carved into scripture, whose obedience and failure are now inseparable in the historical record. And she understands suddenly what he's offering her. Not romance, not even companionship really, but something more costly and more precious. The chance to be part of a redemption story, to bear children who will be blessed, not cursed, sent, not expelled, honored, not erased. It's a strange offer, a painful offer, because it still ends in separation. Her sons will still go east, will still leave Isaac's territory, will still be removed from the primary narrative, but the removal will be different. It will carry blessing instead of shame. It will be strategic rather than violent. She takes a breath. And when you die, what happens to us then? When I die, Abraham says slowly, Isaac will bury me beside Sarah. That is right and proper. But you will stand at that burial as my wife, not my concubine. Your sons will be called sons of Abraham, not bastards of a secondary union. And everyone who wants to erase you will have to contend with the fact that I, in my final years, chose to honor you publicly. The lamp flickers between them, casting dancing shadows on the tent walls. Outside she can hear the camp settling into evening routines. Voices calling, children laughing, the bleat of sheep. Normal life continuing as if the conversation in this tent isn't rewriting everything. I need to think, KETURAH says. Abraham nods. Of course. But KETURAH. He reaches across the space between them and takes her hand. An act of shocking intimacy for a patriarch. His skin is paper-thin, spotted with age, but his grip is firm. Know this. You are not an afterthought. You are not a footnote. You are the evidence that I finally learned what God was trying to teach me all along. That his covenant is wider than my fear, wider than my bloodline, wider than my ability to comprehend it. She rises, bows slightly, and slips out of the tent into the night. The stars are impossibly bright, scattered across the sky like promises too numerous to count. And for the first time in her life, KETURAH wonders if one of them might be for her. The news spreads through Hebron like fire through dry grass. By morning, everyone knows Abraham has proposed marriage to the Canaanite oil merchant, not as a concubine, as a wife. The distinction matters, and it enrages people in ways KETURAH didn't fully anticipate. She opens her stall as usual, arranging her oils with hands that refuse to tremble. But the marketplace feels different today. The whispers have teeth now. Women gather in tight clusters, their eyes sharp with judgment. Men shake their heads, discussing theology and tradition in voices loud enough for her to hear. After everything, one elder mutters to his companion, and after all is talk about Isaac marrying within the family, about Rebekah coming from his own people in Mesopotamia. Now he takes a Canaanite. Sarah would turn in her grave. Sarah's turning in her grave. KETURAH keeps her face neutral, continues her work. She has learned that responding to contempt only feeds it. Better to be stoned, to let the words break against her silence. But then, Isaac arrives. She sees him before he sees her. Abraham's son, the miracle child. now a man in his 60s with gray threading through his beard. He moves through the marketplace with the unconscious authority of someone who has never had to question his place in the world. People step aside for him. Conversations pause out of respect. He stops at a stall. The marketplace falls silent. Every eye turns toward them. This is the confrontation everyone has been waiting for. The moment when the legitimate heir puts the interloper in her place. You sell me. Isaac's voice is carefully neutral as KETURAH meets his eyes, refuses to look away. For anointing, for burial, for moments when we need to mark the sacred. My mother's body was anointed with myrrh. He picks up one of her vessels, turns it in his hands. 20 years ago I remember the smell. It's particular, not easy to forget. No, KETURAH says quietly, not easy to forget. Isaac sets the vessel down with more force than necessary. My father is 140 years old. He buried the love of his life 2 decades ago. He has earned rest, peace, the dignity of his final years without he stops, recalibrates, and without complication. And do you think I'm a complication? I think you're a Canaanite woman who sees an opportunity. Isaac's voice is low, meant only for her ears, but the crowd leans in anyway, hungry for drama. I think my father is old and grieving and vulnerable to someone who knows how to present herself as comfort. KETURAH could back down, should back down, until she hears herself say, "Your father sent for me," not the other way around. And what he's offering isn't comfort, it's correction. Isaac's eyes narrow. Correction of what? Ask him yourself. They stare at each other across her small table of oils and unwanted. In Isaac's face, KETURAH sees fear wrapped in anger. The fear of a son who thought he understood his father's story, who thought the narrative was settled, complete, and now in the final chapter, everything is shifting beneath his feet. With a Canaanite wife, Isaac says, and this time his voice carries meant for the crowd. After everything God commanded about separation, after you made me endure months of waiting while you sent a servant to find Rebekah from your own people in Haran, after you taught me that covenant requires purity, distinction, boundaries, now you do this. He's not talking to KETURAH anymore. He's turned toward his father's camp, toward the tent where Abraham rests, and his voice rises with each word. You're betraying your own principles. You're making a mockery of everything you taught me about obedience. Abraham emerges from his tent. His body is bent, his movement slow, but his presence still commands attention. The crowd parts for him as he makes his way toward the marketplace, toward his son, Isaac. Abraham's voice is gentle but firm. Walk with me. I don't want to walk. I want an explanation. I want to understand how the man who nearly sacrificed me in obedience to God now disobeys everything God said about walk with me. Not a request, this time. Isaac's jaw clenches, but he follows. Abraham leads him away from the marketplace toward the outskirts of camp where the tents give way to open land. KETURAH watches them go, 2 silhouettes against the morning light. The ancient father and the aging son, still navigating the complicated terrain of love and obedience. The crowd disperses slowly, reluctantly. The show is over, at least for now. KETURAH packs up her stall early. No one will buy from her today. Possibly not ever again. That night she finds herself unable to sleep. The darkness in her small dwelling feels oppressive, thick with questions she doesn't know how to answer. She lights a lamp and kneels on the packed earth floor, her hands pressed together, not in the formal prayer postures she's seen among Abraham's people, but in the instinctive gesture of a human reaching towards something larger than herself. God of Abraham, her voice is barely a whisper. And if you are also the God of Hagar, the God who sees the cascade, the God who hears the forgotten, why do you allow me this? Why put me in a position where my very presence causes division, where a blessing for me means pain for others? The silence is absolute. No voice from heaven, no burning bush, just the small flame of her lamp and the vast darkness beyond it. She thinks of her mother dead these 10 years now. A Canaanite woman who had loved a trader from the north, who had born a daughter into a world that would never fully accept her mixed heritage. Her mother's words come back to her across the years. You carry a lineage the Hebrews will despise and the nations will forget, but it is yours. Do not apologize for existing. A sound at her doorway makes her look up. Abraham stands there leaning heavily on his staff, his breath labored from the walk. Before she can speak, before she can ask how he found her dwelling or why he's come at this hour, he lowers himself carefully onto the ground beside her. They sit in silence for a long moment. Then Abraham speaks, his voice carrying the weight of decades. I told Isaac something today that I've never told anyone, not even Sarah, though I think she knew. He pauses, gathering strength. When God told me to send Hagar and Ishmael away, I obeyed. I gave them bread and water and sent them into the wilderness. And I told myself it was faith, obedience, the hard cost of following God's specific plan. His hands tremble as he continues. But that night after they left, I couldn't sleep. I kept seeing Ishmael's face, my son, my firstborn, walking away into nothing because I chose certainty over complexity. And I heard a voice, whether from God or my own conscience, I still don't know, asking me, did I tell you to send them away with contempt? Did I tell you to give them barely enough to survive? Did I tell you to cast them out as if they were garbage? KETURAH sees tears on the old man's face, silver in the lamplight. God saved them despite my cruelty, KETURAH. He provided a well when they were dying. He made Ishmael a great nation just as he promised. But that doesn't mean I did it right. That doesn't mean my obedience wasn't stained with violence. Abraham turns to look at her directly. I sent away a woman and her son because I was afraid of division, of conflict, of losing the promise. God corrected my fear, but he didn't erase my guilt. Then why? KETURAH's voice breaks. Why do this again? Why marry me if you know I'll bring division? If you know my sons will also be sent away? Because this time will be different. Abraham reaches for her hand, his grip weak but determined. This time I will bless them before they go. This time I will give them gifts and provision and my public acknowledgement. This time being sent will not mean being discarded, and perhaps his voice drops to barely a whisper. Perhaps God will use my second attempt to heal what my first attempt broke. KETURAH stares at him. This man who contains multitudes, faith and failure, obedience and cruelty, courage and fear, all mixed together in proportions that refuse easy categorization. And she realizes that what he's offering her isn't purity or simplicity. He's offering her participation in something messy and complicated and shot through with the possibility of redemption. You will bear sons, Abraham continues. And now his voice carries a strange authority, as if he's speaking something into existence rather than merely predicting it. And I will send them east, away from Isaac, as I sent Ishmael south. But this time, I will bless them before they go. This time, I will prove that God's covenant is not a zero-sum game, that Isaac's inheritance doesn't require your son's erasure. This time I will show that being sent can be a form of protection, of strategic positioning rather than punishment. He releases her hand and reaches into his robe, pulling out a small wooden box. The craftsmanship is exquisite, carved with symbols she recognizes from different traditions. Egyptian hieroglyphs intertwined with Canaanite script. Hebrew letters flowing into pictographs she doesn't know. I made this over the last month, Abraham says, offering it to her. I've been planning this for longer than you know. This box contains seeds from Sarah's garden, coins from Egypt, where I learned that God can provide even in foreign lands, and a piece of the altar I built when God first called me. It's your son's inheritance, not land, not flocks. A memory that God's covenant does not fear mixture, it redeems it. KETURAH takes the box, her fingers tracing the intricate carvings. She opens it carefully. Inside, along with the items Abraham mentioned, there's something else. A small piece of fabric, faded and worn. She recognizes it immediately, though she's never seen it before. Hagar's headscarf. Abram says quietly, I kept it all these years. A reminder of what I did wrong, of the woman I failed to honor. I want your sons to have it so they know their story is connected to Ishmael's story, so they know that being sent away by me doesn't mean being rejected by God. Something breaks open in KETURAH's chest. Not the clean break of a bone snapping, but the messy rupture of something long frozen finally beginning to thaw. She thinks of all the years she spent making herself small, invisible, acceptable, and here is a man offering her the opposite. Visibility, acknowledgement, a place in a story she thought had no room for her. I accept, she whispers. I will be your wife. Abraham's face crumples with relief and grief mixed together. Thank you. You're giving me a chance I don't deserve, the chance to do it right this time. They sit together in the lamplight. Two people who understand what it means to be both chosen and complicated, both blessed and burdensome. Outside, the night holds its breath. Somewhere in Hebron, Isaac is wrestling with a father who refuses to be simple. Somewhere in the marketplace, people are sharpening their judgments for tomorrow's gossip. Somewhere in the vast desert, Ishmael's descendants are building a nation from the materials of their abandonment. And here, in a small dwelling on the edge of everything, a covenant is being formed that Scripture will barely mention, but that God apparently considers worth including it all. The lamp flickers. KETURAH reaches to steady it, and Abraham stops her hand. Let it burn, he says. Let it witness. So they sit in silence as the flame dances between them, casting their shadows large against the walls. Evidence that sometimes the forgotten are exactly who God chooses to remember. The wedding ceremony is small. 3 witnesses, barely the minimum required by custom. No celebration, no feast, no gathering of clans to witness and bless the union. Just Abraham and KETURAH standing before an elder who agrees to officiate only after long persuasion. And KETURAH suspects a substantial gift to his household. The elder recites the traditional words with a face like stone. He doesn't meet Keturah's eyes. When he pronounces them bound in covenant, his voice carries no joy, only the mechanical fulfillment of duty. The 3 witnesses sign their names to the contract with visible reluctance, as if the ink itself might contaminate them. But it's done, legal, binding. KETURAH is now Abraham's wife. The news moves through Hebron like a plague. By evening, the community is fractured into camps. Some see Abraham's choice as the confusion of advanced age, a temporary madness to be endured until nature takes its course. Others view it as outright apostasy. The patriarch who walked with God now walking away from everything he taught them about separation and purity. No one, not a single person, offers congratulations. KETURAH moves her few possessions into a tent at the edge of Abraham's camp. Not Sarah's tent, that remains empty, a shrine to memory that no one dares disturb, not even close to Isaac's dwelling. Her tent is positioned carefully, deliberately at the boundary, part of Abraham's household, but not quite integrated into it. She arranges her belongings with the same careful attention she gives everything. Her royals and unwants the wooden box Abraham gave her, a few garments, a scrap of papyrus with Sarah's words that she still can't bring herself to destroy. Her life fits into a space small enough to dismantle in minutes, and she suspects that's exactly how Isaac and his household preferred. In the days that follow, KETURAH begins to study the stories of Abraham's life. Not from Abraham himself. He's too weak now for extensive conversation, his energy reserved for essential matters. Instead, she listens. She positions herself near the communal fires in the evening, when the servants and workers gather to share the day's gossip and the old stories that bind them together as a people. She hears about Abraham's journey about the call that came to him like lightning, demanding he leave everything familiar. She hears about his time in Egypt, how he lied about Sarah being his sister, how Pharaoh took her into his household before plagues revealed the deception. She hears about the promise of descendants as numerous as stars, repeated again and again across decades of waiting. And she hears about Hagar. The story is told different ways, depending on who's speaking. Some versions are sympathetic. Poor Hagar, caught between Sarah's desperation and Abraham's weakness, bearing a son only to be cast out. Other versions are harsh. Hagar, the proud Egyptian who forgot her place, who raised her son to mock Isaac, who deserved exile for her presumption. But all the versions agree on one thing. Abraham sent her away. Bread, water, and a child on her shoulder, walking into wilderness that should have killed them both. And God saved them. Yes, but only after Abraham had already made his choice. One night, unable to sleep, KETURAH slips into Abraham's tent. She finds what she's looking for in a cedar chest beneath scrolls and garments, a piece of cloth faded from what must have once been vibrant blue, It's torn along one edge as if ripped rather than cut. She lifts it carefully and the scent of old incense clings to the fibers. Hagar's headscarf, the one Abraham mentioned. But this isn't the piece he gave her in the wooden box. This is another one kept separately, hidden beneath the accumulated layers of a long life. But steps behind her. She turns to find Abraham in the doorway, his face unreadable. "I kept two," he says simply. "One to give away as evidence of my failure, one to keep as penance for my guilt." He moves slowly into the tent, lowers himself with difficulty onto a cushion. "There's more I haven't told you." KETURAH sits across from him, the blue cloth still in her hands. "I've been sending gifts to Ishmael's camp for years," Abraham says. "Grain or tools, livestock, never announced, never explained. My servants think I'm mad, wasting resources on a son who no longer matters to the covenant, but I can't stop." It's like he struggles for words, like trying to pour water back into a broken system. It doesn't fix the crack, but I have to try anyway. "Does Ishmael know they're from you?" "I don't know. I send them through intermediaries, traders who don't reveal their source. Maybe he thinks they're from God, provision appearing mysteriously. Maybe he knows and it makes him angrier because gifts without relationship are just another form of abandonment." Abraham's voice breaks. "I don't even know which would be worse." KETURAH folds the headscarf carefully, reverently. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because you need to understand what you've agreed to. You will bear sons. I feel this in my bones. KETURAH, God has given me another chance. But those sons will grow up in a household that doesn't want them. They will be fed and sheltered but not embraced. And when they're old enough, I will send them away as I sent Ishmael, as I sent the son of my flesh into wilderness." His eyes meet hers and she sees the full weight of his years in them. "The difference is, this time I will send them with blessing. This time I will give them not just bread and water but inheritance limited. Yes, not the land promise but real provision. This time being sent will not be the same as being erased, but they will still go." KETURAH's voice is steady. She needs to speak this clearly to understand fully what she's agreed to. They will still leave. They will still grow up knowing they are not Isaac's equals, not full heirs, not the center of the story. Yes, Abraham doesn't look away. "And that is the cost I'm asking you to bear to mother's sons who will be blessed but displaced. To love children knowing they will not inherit the land their father owns. To raise them in the knowledge that their existence is both gift and complication." The tent is silent except for the small sounds of night, wind against canvas, the distant call of a nightbird, the settling of embers in a nearby fire. "There's something else you should know," Abraham says. "I've been writing a record of my life for Isaac and his descendants, not the official genealogies. The elders keep those. This is something more personal. My mistakes along with my obedience. The moments I got it right and the many times I got it catastrophically wrong." He gestures to a worn leather case in the corner. "It's in there, including everything about Hagar, everything about what I'm trying to do differently with you." KETURAH moves to the case, opens it carefully. Inside are dozens of small scrolls, Abraham's spidery handwriting covering them in dense columns. She unfurls one at random and reads, "I thought God's promise required me to be ruthless. I thought covenant meant cutting away everything that complicated the narrative. But perhaps, and I say this knowing I may be wrong, perhaps God's covenant is larger than my ability to comprehend it. Perhaps the promise can be specific without requiring everyone else to be erased." She looks up at Abraham. "You're not sure. Even now, after everything, you're not sure you're doing the right thing." "No," his voice is quiet but steady. "I'm not sure. I'm old KETURAH. I've walked with God for over a century. And the longer I walk, the less certain I become about everything except this. God is more merciful than I am. His capacity for inclusion exceeds my capacity for comprehension. And if I'm wrong, if marrying you is a mistake, if blessing your sons before sending them away is a violation of some principle I'm too old to see, then God will correct me as He's corrected me before. But I'd rather err on the side of mercy than repeat the error of cruelty." The next morning KETURAH returns to the marketplace, not to sell. She's given up that trade, at least for now. She comes to buy, to be seen, to refuse invisibility. Rebecca is there, Isaac's wife, beautiful and sharp-eyed. moving through the stalls with the confidence of someone who has never questioned her place in the story. She sees KETURAH and changes direction deliberately, positioning herself in KETURAH's path. "So," Rebecca says, her voice carrying to the nearby vendors, "you've done it? Convinced an old man to give you status you didn't earn." KETURAH meets her gaze steadily. "I didn't convince him of anything. He chose this. He chose it because you were available, because you were convenient, because you sell the oils he'll need soon enough for his own burial, and perhaps you wanted to keep them close." Rebecca's smile is cold. "You think bearing sons will give you standing? You think Abraham's protection will last beyond his death? Let me tell you something about how these stories work. Sarah is the mother of nations. Her name is spoken with reverence. Her memory shapes how we understand covenant and promise. You," she pauses, letting the word hang, "you are a phase, a footnote, a confusion that will be quietly edited out once the elders write the official account." Other women have gathered, drawn by the confrontation. Some look sympathetic to Rebecca. Others seem uncomfortable with her harshness, but none speak in Kira's defense. "Perhaps you're right," KETURAH says quietly. "Perhaps I will be forgotten. Perhaps my sons' names will barely make it into the record. But I'm learning that God has a strange habit of including what the official accounts want to exclude. Ask Hagar. Ask Ishmael. They were supposed to disappear, but their stories keep echoing." She walks away before Rebecca can respond, her head high, her hands steady. But once she's alone in her tent, she allows herself to shake, allows herself to feel the full weight of what Rebecca spoke aloud. The truth everyone knows but rarely says directly. She will be erased, not immediately, not violently, but slowly through the careful editorial choices of people who prefer simple narratives to complicated truths. That night she dreams. In the dream she stands before a tree unlike any she's seen. 7 branches extend from a single trunk, each reaching in a different direction. East, northeast, southeast, spreading like fingers across a map. The branches bear fruit, heavy and ripe, but she can't identify what kind. The tree is planted in soil that shifts beneath her feet, unstable and yet somehow sustaining growth. A voice speaks, not audible, not exactly, but present nonetheless. The forgotten are still the planted. She wakes with the phrase on her lips, her heart pounding. Through the gap in her tent, she can see the first gray light of dawn, and she realizes something that brings both comfort and pain. She has agreed to bear children who will be blessed but not primary, honored but not central, included but not integrated. She has agreed to mother nations that no one will count among the chosen. It is a strange calling, a painful calling, but it is, she realizes with growing certainty, still a calling. Later that morning, Abraham summons her. When she enters his tent, he's holding the wooden box he gave her, and his face carries an expression she can't quite read. Part sorrow, part determination. "I have something else to give you," he says. He opens the box and adds one more item to the contents. A small bronze knife, its handle worn smooth with use. "This is the knife I took to Mount Moriah when God told me to offer Isaac. The knife I raised over my son before the angel stopped me." KETURAH stares at the blade, horror and confusion mixing in her chest. "Why would you give me this?" "Because it's the symbol of the worst and best moment of my life," Abraham says. "The worst. Because I was willing to kill my own child in the name of obedience. The best because God stopped me. Showed me he didn't want that kind of sacrifice. That his covenant doesn't require us to destroy what we love." He closes the box carefully. "I want your sons to have this. I want them to know that blind obedience isn't always faith, that sometimes God's mercy looks like interruption, like being stopped from doing the terrible thing we thought he wanted." He meets her eyes. "Your sons will be sent away, KETURAH, but they will go with blessing, with provision, with the knowledge that their departure is not sacrifice, but strategy. And they will carry this knife as evidence that God's covenant is more complicated and more merciful than any of us understand." KETURAH ticks the box, feeling the weight of it, not just the physical weight of wood and metal and seeds and fabric, but the weight of meaning, of chosen symbols. of a man trying desperately to do better the second time around. "I'm pregnant," she says quietly. She's known for days, but hasn't spoken it aloud until now. Abraham's face crumples, joy and grief simultaneously. "Thank you," he whispers. "You're giving me a chance I don't deserve." And KETURAH realizes that this is the cost of covenant too. Not just the price paid by the excluded, but the burden carried by the one trying to make amends. Abraham will die knowing he got it wrong with Hagar and Ishmael. The best he can hope for is to get it less wrong with KETURAH and her sons. It's not redemption. Not quite. Something messier and more human. The fumbling attempt to repair what can't be fully fixed. To honor in the present what was dishonored in the past. The first cost has appeared. Not dramatic, not sudden, but real nonetheless. KETURAH is carrying a child who will be blessed but displaced, honored but not central, included in the story but not at its heart. And she will love that child anyway, fiercely, knowing full well what awaits him. This she understands now is what it means to bear covenant in a body that the covenant was never quite meant for. You carry blessing and cost simultaneously, and you do it anyway because the alternative, invisibility, erasure, the complete absence of acknowledgement, is somehow worse. The child is born on a morning when the sky bleeds pink and gold. KETURAH labors through the night with only 2 midwives attending her. Women paid well enough to overcome their reluctance, but not well enough to hide their disapproval. When the boy finally emerges, red and screaming, one of the midwives cuts the cord with hands that tremble slightly, as if even touching this child might contaminate her. "A son," she announces flatly, without the usual joy that accompanies such declarations. KETURAH holds him against her chest, feeling his small heart beat against hers. Abraham had told her to name him Zimron, a name meaning musician or song. She whispers it to the baby now, a promise and a prayer woven together. "You will be a song even if no one sings you. You will make music even if the official records keep no account of your melody." The midwives clean the child with efficient motions, wrap him tightly, and leave without the customary blessings. No women from the camp come to visit, to bring gifts, to celebrate the birth as they would for Isaac's children. The silence is deliberate, pointed. This birth doesn't count in the ways that matter. While Abraham comes, he arrives at midday, moving slowly with his staff, his ancient body bent, but his eyes bright with emotion. He takes the child carefully, holds him up to the light streaming through the tent opening. "Zimron," he says, his voice cracking. "My son, blessed by the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, blessed by the God who sees, who remembers, who includes what we try to exclude." He traces a finger across the baby's forehead, a gesture that looks like benediction. "You will go east, little one, but you will go with my name, my provision, and my public acknowledgement. I swear it. Isaac doesn't come. Not that day, not the next, not at all." The message is clear. This child exists in a liminal space, legally Abraham's son, but not socially recognized, not embraced by the household, not woven into the fabric of covenant promise that centers on Isaac's line. When Zimron is 8 days old, Abraham insists on a circumcision ceremony. It's smaller than tradition requires, no feast, no gathering of the community, but Abraham makes sure there are witnesses. 5 elders summoned specifically who stand with obvious discomfort as Abraham performs the ritual himself, his hands shaking with age, but his voice steady as he speaks the covenant words over his son. This child enters the covenant of Abraham. He bears the mark of the promise. He belongs to the God who called me from Ur, who led me to Canaan, who made me a father of nations, plural, not singular. This child is mine, and I bless him. The elders sign their names to the record with faces like stone. One mutters something about irregularities and questionable precedent. Another simply shakes his head and walks away immediately after signing. But it's done, legal, witnessed. Zimron is circumcised, marked as Abraham's son, entered into the covenant record that Isaac's scribes maintain. That night, one of the scribes comes to KETURAH's tent. He's young, his beard still sparse, his eyes nervous. He carries a scroll under his arm. "I need to record the birth," he says, not meeting her eyes, "for the official genealogy. KETURAH watches as he unfurls the scroll on a low table. She can see the carefully maintained family tree, Abraham at the top, branching down to Ishmael, marked with a notation she can't quite read, then to Isaac, then to Isaac's sons, Jacob and Esau, with elaborate detail about their births, their blessings, their significance. The scribe dips his reed in ink and writes in the margin almost as an afterthought, Zimron, son of KETURAH. That's it. KETURAH asks quietly, as all the scribe's hand pauses. He looks uncomfortable, caught between duty and something that might be conscience. What else would you have me write? That he was circumcised. That Abraham blessed him publicly. That he is a legitimate son, not as she stops herself. I can note that circumcision, the scribe says slowly. He adds a small mark beside Zimron's name, but the rest I write what the elders tell me to write. And they say, he stops, then continues more quietly. They say to keep the record minimal, to not confuse the primary line with secondary branches. He rolls up the scroll quickly, as if lingering might force him to see something he doesn't want to acknowledge. I'm sorry, he whispers, and then he's gone. KETURAH stares at the space where he sat. Minimal record, secondary branch, the language of erasure spoken politely. The months pass and KETURAH becomes pregnant again. Then again, within 6 years, she bears Abraham's 6 sons, Zimonjin, Medan, Midian, Ishbak, Shua. Each birth is met with the same cold silence from the camp. Each circumcision is witnessed by reluctant elders. Each name is added to the genealogical record in cramped margin notes, as if the scribe resents having to include them at all. Abraham grows weaker with each birth, but he makes sure to hold each son, to bless each one publicly, to speak over them words of promise and provision. The gifts he gives them accumulate in KETURAH's tent: tools, small bags of silver, deeds to wells dug specifically for them in the Eastern Territories, written instructions for trade routes Abraham learned decades ago. They will need these, Abraham tells her, his voice increasingly frail. Me, when they go east, they will need to know I thought of them, that I prepared for them, that their departure was planned, not improvised in panic like Ishmael. But the household's hostility grows with each birth. Rebekah's contempt is spread like infection through the women. They don't speak to KETURAH in the marketplace. They turn their backs when she approaches the communal well. They teach their children to avoid KETURAH's sons, to not play with them, to not acknowledge them as kin. One afternoon, KETURAH finds 6-year-old Zimon sitting alone outside her tent, watching Isaac's grandchildren play nearby. His face is carefully neutral, but she can see the longing in his eyes, the desire to join them, to be included, to be just another child in Abraham's large and complicated household. Why don't they like us? Mother, he asks without looking at her. KETURAH sits beside him, pulls him close. It's not about liking, it's about fear. Fear of what? Fear that there isn't enough blessing to go around. Fear that if your grandfather honors you, it somehow diminishes the honor given to Isaac's line. Fear that God's promise is too small to include everyone, so they have to protect it by excluding people like us. Is it too small? Zimon's voice is so quiet she barely hears it. No, my love, it's not. But sometimes people treat God's generosity like a limited resource that must be hoarded, rather than a river that keeps flowing no matter how many drink from it. She doesn't tell him the rest. That he will be sent away. That all 6 brothers will be given inheritance and blessing and then directed east, away from the land promise, away from Isaac's territory. He'll learn that soon enough. For now, let him be a child watching other children play, holding on to the simple hope that tomorrow might be different. But tomorrow isn't different. The isolation intensifies. One morning, KETURAH goes to draw water and finds the communal well deliberately fouled. Animal waste dumped in during the night. It's not the first time. The women of Isaac's household have developed subtle ways of making life difficult. Spoiled grain delivered to KETURAH's tent. Tools borrowed and not returned. Small acts of sabotage that are never quite overt enough to accuse directly, but clear enough in their intent. KETURAH says nothing. She digs her own small well at the edge of camp. Back-breaking work that takes days and draws from it instead. She teaches her sons to be self-sufficient, to not expect help, to not trust that the community will support them. We are Abraham's sons. She tells him again and again. We carry his name. We bear his blessing, and that is enough, even when nothing else is given. But it's not enough. Not really. She can see it in their eyes as they grow. The confusion, the hurt, the slowly building resentment at being simultaneously included and excluded, acknowledged and ignored, blessed and marginalized. The worst comes on a Sabbath evening. Abraham has insisted that all his household gather for the weekly meal. Isaac's family, KETURAH and her sons, servants, everyone. It's awkward and tense, but Abraham's presence still commands enough respect that people comply. They're midway through the meal when one of Isaac's grandsons, a boy of maybe 10, points at Midian and asks loudly, "Why is the Canaanite here?" Father says, "Canes aren't part of covenant." The table falls silent. Isaac closes his eyes as if in pain. Rebekah's face flushes, but she says nothing to correct the child. Abraham's hand trembles on his cup. Before anyone can respond, Midian, only 5 years old, looks up at the boy with eyes too solemn for his age and says, "I'm not Canaanite. I'm Midian, son of Abraham, and the God who made covenant with grandfathers big enough for both of us." The boy's father, one of Isaac's sons, laughs, not kindly. Big enough, maybe, but specific about who inherits what. Your mother should have taught you that. KETURAH feels rage rise in her chest, hot and dangerous. But before she can speak, Abraham slams his cup down with surprising force for a man his age. Enough. His voice cuts through the tension like a blade. Every child at this table is my descendant. Everyone carries my blood, and everyone will be blessed according to God's purpose, not according to your narrow understanding of how covenant works. He glares at Isaac's son. Your grandfather learned too late, but he learned that God's mercy is wider than human fear. If you haven't learned that yet, then you're a fool, and I won't have fools at my table. The meal ends quickly after that, people dispersing into the night with relief. But the damage is done. KETURAH's sons have heard it spoken plainly now. You don't belong here. You're tolerated because Abraham insists. But the moment he's gone, so are you. That night KETURAH finds the scribe's scroll, the one recording her son's births, lying torn outside her tent. Someone has ripped it deliberately right through the section containing their names. The ink has run where water was poured over it, making the names barely legible. She brings it to Abraham, her hands shaking with rage and grief. He looks at the damaged scroll for a long moment. Then with great effort he stands and makes his way to his writing materials. He takes a fresh piece of parchment and writes in large clear letters, Zimran, Joshan, Midian, Midian, Ishbak, Shua, sons of Abraham by KETURAH his wife, blessed by the God of their father, sent east with provision, with inheritance, with the name of Abraham. They are not forgotten by me, and that is enough. He signs it, seals it with his personal seal, and hands it to KETURAH. Keep this. When I die, give it to them. Let them know that even if the official records erase them, even if the scribes write them in margins and the community pretends they don't exist, I remembered them. I chose them. I blessed them. Tears streaked down his weathered face. I'm so sorry, KETURAH. I thought I could do it better this time. I thought public blessing would be enough to change how the community treats you. But fear is stronger than I anticipated. Exclusion is easier than expansion. And I'm too old, too harder. KETURAH kneels beside him, takes his trembling hands. You did do it better. Not perfectly. Not in a way that erases all costs, but better. Hagar left with bread and water and a child on her shoulder. I will leave when the time comes with blessed sons, with provision, with written acknowledgement of their legitimacy. It's not the same. But it still hurts, Shesh, she whispers. It still hurts, Shesh. They sit together in silence, to people who understand that doing better doesn't mean doing perfectly, that growth doesn't erase all pain, that trying to repair past failures often means bearing new ones. Outside, the camp settles into night. Somewhere her 6 sons are sleeping, blessed and displaced, honored and included in the record and erased from memory simultaneously. And KETURAH realizes with sharp clarity, this is the inheritance she's giving them. Not land, not flocks, not central placement in the story of God's people, but something else. The knowledge that even when the official narrative excludes you, even when the record keepers write you in margins, even when the community tries to pretend you don't exist, God remembers. It will have to be enough, because it's all she has to give. Abraham is dying. Everyone knows it. His breath comes shallow and labored. His skin has taken on the translucent quality of parchment held up to light. He sleeps more than he wakes. And when he wakes, his moments of clarity are brief, precious, fought for against the encroaching fog of his body's final surrender. The camp holds its breath, waiting. Isaac moves through his days with the careful composure of a man preparing for the inevitable. Rebecca organizes the household with increased efficiency, already positioning herself as matriarch in waiting. The servants speak in whispers, aware that everything is about to shift. But Abraham, even in his weakness, has one more act to perform. He summons the entire household. Not a request, a command delivered with what remains of his patriarchal authority. Everyone must come. Isaac and his family, KETURAH and his sons, the servants, the elders from Hebron, every person who falls under Abraham's authority or bears his name, they gather in the largest tent expanded with additional canvas to hold everyone. The air is thick with body heat and tension. Isaac sits to Abraham's right, his face unreadable. KETURAH and her 6 sons stand at the back, away from the center, but still present, still included. The elders cluster near the entrance, their expressions ranging from curiosity to disapproval. Abraham sits propped against cushions, his breathing audible in the silence. He looks at each face slowly, deliberately, as if memorizing them or perhaps as if seeing them clearly for the first time. I am 175 years old, he begins, his voice weak but steady. I have walked with God for more years than most of you have been alive. I have made covenants and broken hearts. I have obeyed and failed. I have been blessed beyond measure and caused pain beyond my ability to repair. He pauses, gathering strength. Today before I die, I make my final declaration. The tent is absolutely still. Even the children sense the weight of this moment. Isaac Abraham turns to his son. You are heir of the covenant promise. The land from the river of Egypt to the great river Euphrates, this belongs to your descendants. The blessing I received from God that through your seed all nations will be blessed. This is yours. The covenant of circumcision, the altar at Hebron, the cave of Machpelah where Sarah rests, all of this is your inheritance. You are the son of promise, and that will never change. Isaac's shoulders relaxed slightly. This is what he needed to hear, what everyone needed to hear confirmed. But Abraham isn't finished. However, the word falls like a stone into still water. Isaac is heir of the covenant promise, but Korah's sons are heirs of my name. His voice strengthens, fueled by some reserve of will. Zimran, Joshan, Medan, Midian, Ishbak, Shua, come forward. The 6 boys, ranging from 12 years old down to 6, move through the crowd with visible nervousness. KETURAH's heart pounds as she watches them approach their father's deathbed. She can feel the hostility radiating from Isaac's family, the confusion from the elders, the uncertainty from everyone. Abraham reaches out, touches each boy's head in turn. You are my sons, nor secondary, nor illegitimate, nor footnotes. You are sons of Abraham, and you will carry my seed. 2 peoples Isaac's line will never reach. You will go east, not in exile, not in punishment, but in mission. You will carry Abraham's name to nations that don't yet know the God who called me. The tent erupts in murmurs as several elders exchange sharp glances. Isaac's face has gone rigid. Father Isaac begins, but Abraham raises a hand. I am not diminishing your inheritance, my son. The land promise is still yours. The covenant blessing is still yours. But I will not repeat with KETURAH's sons what I did with Ishmael. I will not send them away in silence and shame. I will not cast them out as if they were mistakes to be hidden. His voice cracks with emotion. They will go east, yes, but they will go with blessing, with provision, with gifts, with my public acknowledgement that they are Abraham's sons, and that matters. He gestures weakly, and servants bring forward 6 leather bags heavy with contents. And for each of my sons by KETURAH silver, gold, deeds to wells I have dug in the eastern territories, maps of trade routes, letters of introduction to merchants who knew me in my younger years. You will not go empty-handed. You will not wander in wilderness hoping God provides. You will go equipped, blessed, prepared. Zimun, the oldest, speaks with a voice that trembles. Why send us at all? Grandfather, if you bless us, why not let us stay? Abraham's eyes fill with tears, because the land promised belongs to Isaac, because God's covenant with me specifies his line, because he takes a shuddering breath, because even blessing can't erase the reality that you were born outside the primary promise. But that doesn't make you less, it makes you different. You will build nations in lands Isaac's children will never inherit. You will carry the knowledge of the God of Abraham to peoples who don't yet know his name. You are not the center of the story. Isaac is, but you are still in the story. You still matter, you are still mine. The honesty is brutal and beautiful at once. He is not pretending the situation is fair. He is not claiming that blessing makes up for displacement. He's simply stating the reality. Complicated, painful, shot through with both honor and cost. There's something else, Abraham continues. He gestures to KETURAH, who comes forward with the wooden box he gave her years ago. Abraham opens it slowly, showing its contents to the gathered crowd. Seeds from Sarah's garden, coins from Egypt, a piece of my first altar, Hagar's headscarf, and this. He lifts a bronze knife with trembling hands, the knife I took to Mount Moriah, the knife I raised over Isaac before God stopped me. Isaac inhaled sharply, his face draining of color. He hasn't seen this knife since that terrible day decades ago. I give these to KETURAH's sons, Abram says, so they will know their story is connected to all of our stories. So they will know that God's covenant is not simple, not clean, not easy to categorize. So they will carry the memory that God interrupted my worst impulse, the impulse to destroy what I loved in the name of obedience, and taught me that his covenant doesn't require human sacrifice. It requires human faithfulness, which is a different thing entirely. An elder stands abruptly. This is madness. You're confusing the covenant. You're giving these Canaanite children my children. Abraham interrupts, steel in his failing voice. My sons by my wife KETURAH, whom I married legally, publicly, deliberately. And if calling them mine confuses your understanding of covenant, then your understanding is too small. The elder sits down, his face red with anger and embarrassment. Abraham looks around the tent, his gaze settling on each person with peculiar intensity. I have lived 175 years. I have walked with God longer than most nations exist, and if my long life has taught me anything, it is this. God does not waste the wounded. He does not discard the irregular. He does not require simplicity in order to work his purposes. He pauses, breathing hard, the effort of speaking clearly taking its toll. Sarah, Hagar, KETURAH, you are not rivals in his eyes. You were threads in a design I could not see. Isaac, Ishmael, these 6 sons, you are not competing for a limited blessing. You are expressions of a generosity that exceeds human understanding. His voice drops to barely above a whisper, and everyone leans in to hear. Isaac, when I die, do not repeat my fear. Bless before you release. Love before you separate. Honor these boys as your brothers, even as you send them to build their own nations, because they are your brothers, and if you erase them, you erase part of your own story. Isaac's face is wet with tears now. He nods, unable to speak. Abraham turns his fading gaze to KETURAH. Thank you, he whispers, for giving me a second chance, for bearing sons I could do better by, for not letting my failure with Hagar be the final word on how I treat the women. Now he stops, searching for words. The women I needed more than they needed me. Then he closes his eyes, exhausted, the declaration complete. The tent empties slowly, people filing out in stunned silence. Some are angry. KETURAH can see it in the set of their shoulders, the tightness of their jaws. Others look thoughtful, troubled, as if something they thought they understood has suddenly become complicated. The elders cluster outside, their voices rising in heated debate about precedent and tradition, and the problems of giving legitimacy to mixed offspring. But it's done public witnessed. Abraham has declared Keturah's sons his heirs, not of land, not of covenant promise, but of name. And in a culture where name is identity, where lineage is destiny, this is not nothing. Keturah returns to her tent with her 6 sons. They're quiet, processing what just happened. Finally Aishan speaks. Are we being sent away because we're not good enough? Keturah kneels so she's at eye level with them. But you're being sent away because the covenant promise is specific. It goes through Isaac's line. That's not about worth, it's about God's particular plan. But your grandfather is making sure that being sent doesn't mean being discarded. You will go with blessing, with provision, with his name. That's different from what happened to Ishmael. That's better. Not perfect, not painless, but better. Will we ever come back? Midian asks, his voice small. I don't know, Keturah answers honestly. But you will know who you are. You will know your father blessed you. You will know the God who called Abraham sees you too. And that knowledge will have to be enough. That night, as the camp sleeps, Keturah sits outside her tent and looks east, the direction her sons will eventually go. She thinks about Hagar walking into wilderness with a child and a prayer. She thinks about Ishmael growing up in exile, building a nation from the materials of his abandonment. She thinks about the 12 princes who came from Ishmael's line just as God promised, a fulfillment that happened outside the official narrative, in the margins, in the forgotten spaces, and she realizes her sons will do the same. They will build nations no one in Isaac's line will count. They will trade with peoples Isaac's descendants will never meet. They will carry the memory of Abraham into territories the land promised never included. They will be blessed and displaced simultaneously, and somehow mysteriously both things will be true at once. A sound makes a turn. Isaac stands nearby, his face drawn with exhaustion and emotion. I don't know how to do this, he says quietly. I don't know how to be brother to your sons while also sending them away. I don't know how to bless what I also fear. Keturah stands, faces him. Your father didn't know either. He's still not sure he got it right, but he's trying. That's all any of us can do. Try to do better than we did before. Even when better still hurts. Isaac nods slowly. When he dies, and it will be soon, I will bury him beside my mother, that's right. That's what should happen. But I will also, he stops, swallows hard. I will also make sure you and your sons are present, not hidden, not erased. You will stand as family, not as footnotes, because if I've learned anything from watching my father's guilt eat at him for decades, it's that erasure is its own form of violence, and I won't add to the violence already done. It's not reconciliation, not full acceptance, but it's something, a small crack in the wall of fear, a tiny opening toward a more complicated, more painful, more honest way of being family. Thank you, Keturah whispers. Isaac turns to leave, then pauses. I'm sorry for how my household has treated you, for teaching my children that covenant requires exclusion. His voice breaks for being so afraid that there wouldn't be enough blessing for all of us that I hoarded what should have been shared. He walks away before she can respond, his silhouette disappearing into the darkness, and Keturah stands alone under the stars. Those same stars Abraham saw when God promised him descendants too numerous to count. She wonders if God, when he made that promise, knew it would include her sons. If he saw even then the Canaanite woman who would bear children into the margins of the covenant, blessed and displaced, honored and sent away, included in the count, even as the counters tried to pretend they weren't there. The stars give no answer. They simply shine, numerous and cold and beautiful, bearing witness to promises too large for any one lineage to contain. Abraham dies 3 days later, just after dawn, with Isaac holding one hand and Keturah holding the other. His last words are barely audible, spoken to no one in particular, or perhaps to everyone at once. Wider than we know, always wider than he's gone. The breath simply stops. The ancient body finally surrenders and the camp erupts into the controlled chaos of grief and logistics. Isaac closes his father's eyes with trembling fingers. For a long moment he simply sits there holding the hand that blessed him, that nearly killed him on a mountain, that guided him through a life lived in the shadow of impossible promises. Then he stands, his face set with the terrible responsibility of being the one who remains. "We bury him tomorrow," Isaac announces to the servants who have gathered at the cave of Machella beside Sarah. "Send word to," he pauses, and KETURAH sees the decision form in real time. "Send word to Ishmael. Tell him his father is dead. Tell him he is welcome at the burial." The servants exchange shocked glances. Ishmael, the exiled son, the one who was cast out and hasn't been seen in decades. Inviting him to the burial is either a gesture of extraordinary grace or a recipe for disaster, and no one is quite sure which. "My lord," one of the older servants ventures carefully, "Ishmael may not come peacefully. There are old wounds." "There are old wounds," Isaac agrees, his voice tight, "and they won't heal if we keep pretending he doesn't exist. Send the message." The preparations begin immediately. Bodies in this climate don't keep long. The burial must happen quickly. Servants wash Abraham's body with practiced efficiency, anointed with spices and oils, including KETURAH notices oils from her own stores, the ones she sold in the marketplace before Abraham changed everything. They wrap him in clean linen, layer after layer, until he looks less like a person and more like a cocoon, as if he might emerge transformed rather than remain forever still. But the household is fracturing even as they prepare. KETURAH can feel it in the sideways glances, the whispered conversations that stop when she approaches, the way Isaac's advisors cluster around him with urgent, angry faces. She catches fragments inappropriate for the concubine to attend. Ishmael is one thing, but the Canaanite woman. Confusion about legitimate succession. What message does it send? The pressure on Isaac is immense. His advisors want him to send KETURAH and her sons away before the burial. Quietly, quickly give them their inheritance bags and direct them east before the funeral procession even forms. It would be cleaner that way, simpler, less politically complicated. Rebecca adds her voice to the chorus. KETURAH overhears her speaking to Isaac in their tent, her voice sharp with frustration. "Your father is dead. You don't know him." Continued loyalty to a decision that was questionable from the beginning. Send them away. Honor them with provision as he wanted, but don't parade them at the burial. Don't give them standing they haven't earned. Isaac's response is inaudible, but Rebecca emerges from the tent with a face like thunder. She sees KETURAH and stops, and for a moment, something almost like pity flickers across her features. "You know this can't last," Rebecca says quietly. "Whatever protection Abraham gave you ends with his death. Isaac is trying to honor his father's wishes, but the elders, the community, they won't accept it. Your sons are provided for. That's more than most get. Take the blessing and go before things get worse." "Is that a threat?" KETURAH asks, keeping her voice level. "It's reality." Rebecca's tone isn't cruel, just matter of fact. "You are always temporary." Abraham's guilt made manifest. His attempt to repair what he did to Hagar by doing slightly better with you, but the repair is complete now. He blessed your sons. He provided for them. He died with a clear conscience, or as clear as possible. Your role is finished. She walks away, leaving KETURAH standing alone in the gathering dusk. And the terrible thing is, Rebecca isn't wrong. Not completely. KETURAH's purpose was always tied to Abraham's need to make amends. With Abraham gone, what is she? What are her sons? That night KETURAH gathers her boys in her tent. They range from 12 to 6 years old. All of them old enough to understand that something fundamental has shifted, but young enough to still look to her for interpretation, for assurance that the ground beneath them isn't disappearing entirely. "Your grandfather is dead," she tells them, though they already know. "Tomorrow we will bury him, and the day after that, or perhaps the day after that, we will leave. We will go east, as he always intended." "Do we have to go, Shua?" the youngest asks. His eyes are wide with a fear he doesn't fully understand. "Yes," KETURAH says gently. "We have to go. The land promise belongs to Isaac. This camp, this place, it was never meant to be ours permanently. But we don't go as exiles. We go as sent ones. There's a difference." "I don't feel the difference," Zimron mutters. At 12, he's old enough to recognize injustice, old enough to resent it, old enough to feel the sting of being simultaneously blessed and expelled. "I know," KETURAH says. and I won't tell you it doesn't hurt. It does hurt, but pain and blessing can exist together. Your grandfather taught me that. He failed Ishmael and it haunted him for decades. He tried to do better with you, not perfectly, but better. And now you carry that better with you into the East. You carry his name, his provision, his blessing, and you carry the knowledge that even when people try to erase you from the record, God sees you. She pulls out the wooden box Abraham gave her, now worn from handling, and opens it to show them the seeds, the coins, the altar fragment, Hagar's headscarf, the bronze knife, each item a piece of the complicated story they've inherited. These are yours, she says, reminders that your story is connected to Isaac's story, to Ishmael's story, to Sarah's story, to Hagar's story, to Hagar's story. You're not separate from the covenant, you're just at the edges of it. And sometimes the edges are where the most interesting things happen. They stare at the contents of the box, these small, sacramental objects that are supposed to substitute for land, for belonging, for a place at the center of the narrative. The next morning they prepare for the burial. KETURAH dresses her sons carefully, makes sure they're clean and presentable. She doesn't know if Isaac will follow through on his promise to let them attend, or if the pressure from his advisors will force a last-minute exclusion, but they'll be ready either way. The funeral procession forms in the early light. Abraham's body is placed on a bier carried by Isaac and his sons. The household falls in behind servants, workers, extended family. Elders from Hebron who have come to pay respects to the patriarch who shaped their community for over a century. KETURAH and her sons stand at the edge of the crowd, uncertain. No one has explicitly told them to join, but no one has told them to stay away either. The ambiguity is deliberate, a way of avoiding decision. Then a figure appears on the horizon, a man tall and weathered leading a small group of followers. He approaches slowly, and as he gets closer, KETURAH sees his face. Strong features, dark skin, eyes that carry the weight of decades lived on the margins. Ishmael. The crowd murmurs as some shrink back. Others stare with open curiosity. Isaac stops walking, turns to face his half-brother for the first time in decades. They stand apart, these two sons of Abraham, separated by history and pain, and promises that seem to require one of them to disappear. The silence stretches unbearably. Then Ishmael speaks, his voice rough with emotion. I came to bury my father, our father. Isaac corrects quietly. He was ours, both of ours, even when we pretended otherwise. Something in Ishmael's face cracks. I heard he married again, that he had more sons, that his voice catcus, that he tried to do it better this time. Isaac nods. He did not perfectly, but better than before. He gestures toward KETURAH and her sons. KETURAH and her are brothers. Ishmael's gaze sweeps over them, and KETURAH sees recognition in his eyes, not of her specifically, but of the position, the secondary wife, the sons who are acknowledged, but not central, the blessing mixed with displacement. He knows this story because he lived it first. Cum Isaac says to both Ishmael and KETURAH, walk with me. Let's bury our father together. All of us, all his children, all the evidence that his story was more complicated than anyone wanted to admit. It's a radical act. Ishmael on one side, Isaac in the middle, KETURAH and her sons following behind. The procession moves toward the cave of Machpelah, and with each step KETURAH feels the weight of resistance from the community. People don't know what to do with this tableau. It violates the careful categories they've constructed. Legitimate and illegitimate. Chosen and rejected. Included and excluded, but they keep walking, one foot in front of the other, carrying Abraham's body toward the cave where Sarah waits. When they arrive, the cave mouth yawns dark and cool. This is where Sarah was buried 20 years ago, where Abraham will now join her. It's the only land Abraham ever owned in Canaan, purchased at full price, a small claim of belonging in a territory of God promised, but Abraham never fully possessed. The body is carried inside. Isaac and Ishmael together lower it into the prepared space beside Sarah's bones. The two brothers work in silence, their movements careful, reverent. When it's done, they emerge into sunlight, and KETURAH sees that both are weeping. An elder steps forward to speak the traditional words. praise for Abraham's faithfulness, recounting of his covenant with God, acknowledgement of his role as father of nations. The plural is right there in the language, nations, not nation. But the elder carefully avoids mentioning Ishmael by name, and he doesn't mention Keturah or her sons at all. The erasure is happening in real time even as they stand right there. When the elder finishes, Isaac steps forward. His voice is hoarse but clear. My father had 3 wives: Sarah, mother of Isaac; Hagar, mother of Ishmael; Keturah, mother of Zimran; Joshan, Medan, Midian, Ishbah, and Shua. He failed Hagar and Ishmael. He tried to do better by Keturah and her sons. He never stopped wrestling with the tension between specific covenant and generous inclusion. And he died hoping, I think, that his children would learn from both his obedience and his failures. He looks at Ishmael. Brother, I can't undo what was done to you. I can't give back the years you spent in exile, but I can acknowledge you now. I can say plainly, you are Abraham's son. You are my brother, and your exclusion was wrong, even if the covenant promise went through my line. Then he turns to Keturah and her sons. And you will go east as father intended, not because you're less, but because the land promise is specific. You will go with provision, with blessing, with his name, and I will not pretend you didn't exist. I will not let the scribes erase you from memory. You are Abraham's sons. You are my brothers, and that matters. It's not perfect. It doesn't undo the pain or erase the cost, but it's something, a public acknowledgement that the official narrative has been too narrow, that the attempt to keep the story simple has required violence against the people who complicated it. As the crowd disperses, Ishmael approaches Keturah. They stand together, 2 people who understand what it means to be simultaneously blessed and sent away. He learned, Ishmael says quietly. With you, he learned. It doesn't fix what he did to me and my mother, but it's something. It's something. Keturah agrees. Where will you go? East. There are wells Abraham dug for us. Trade routes he mapped. We won't wander aimlessly as he had to. Ishmael nods slowly. The God who saw my mother in the wilderness, he'll see you too. And your sons, they'll build nations just as mine did. Nations no one here will count, but they'll exist anyway. And that's its own form of victory. He places a hand on Zimran's shoulder. He be strong, nephew. Build something good in the east. And remember, being forgotten by the official record doesn't mean being forgotten by God. Sometimes the margins are where the truest stories live. Many's gone, returning to his own people, his own nation built from the materials of exile. The camp begins to dismantle. People return to their tents. The burial is complete. Abraham is gone. And now comes the harder part. Living with the aftermath. Sorting out inheritance. Deciding who stays and who goes. That night Keturah sits alone outside her tent. One by one, her sons fall asleep inside, exhausted by grief and uncertainty. She looks up at the stars. Those same stars Abraham saw when God made impossible promises. And she whispers into the darkness, I don't know how to do this. I don't know how to take my sons into the unknown and tell them it's blessing. I don't know how to carry the inheritance of being both honored and expelled. Show me, please. Show me how to believe that being sent is not the same as being abandoned. The stars give no answer, but in the silence, she remembers Abraham's last words. Wider than we know, always wider. Perhaps that's the answer. Perhaps the covenant is wider than anyone has been willing to admit, wider than the land promise, wider than Isaac's line, wider than the careful categories of chosen and unchosen, central and marginal, remembered and forgotten. Perhaps her son's journey east is not exile at all, but expansion, not rejection, but mission, not the end of blessing, but its continuation in unexpected directions. She doesn't fully believe it yet, but she's trying to. And for tonight, in the darkness after Abraham's burial, trying is enough. The days after the burial are thick with tension. Isaac moves through the camp with the careful deliberation of a man trying to honor conflicting obligations. Keturah can feel the noose tightening. Conversations stop when she approaches. Her sons are excluded from communal meals, pushed further to the margins. The message is clear. Your time here is finished. On the 5th day after the burial, Isaac summons her. His face is drawn, exhausted. He doesn't meet her eyes as he speaks. The elders have petitioned me. They say your continued presence creates confusion about succession, about legitimacy. They want you gone now before the week of mourning is even complete. KETURAH keeps her voice steady. And what do you want? I want to honor my father's wishes, but I'm also responsible for this community. I can't protect you anymore. Not against everyone. He finally looks at her. 2 days. I'll give you 2 days to prepare. You'll take everything my father set aside for you. The silver, the gold, the deeds to the wells, and I'll add more. But you have to leave. There's something else. Isaac continues. There's been talk. Dangerous talk. Some of the younger men, they're saying your sons shouldn't be allowed to establish themselves in the Eastern Territories. They're talking about sabotaging the wells, about following you and making sure you fail. Will you stop them? She asks. I'll try. I'll forbid it explicitly, but I can't control what happens once you're beyond my authority. His voice breaks. I'm not as brave as my father tried to be at the end. KETURAH stands to leave, then turns back. Isaac, do you believe your father was wrong to marry me? To bless my sons? He's quiet for a long time. I don't know, maybe he confused guilt with guidance. Or maybe he understood something about God's covenant that I'm still too afraid to see. That it's bigger than our categories. That blessing doesn't diminish by being shared. Which do you believe? I believe both. Isaac says warily simultaneously, and I don't know how to live with that contradiction. KETURAH returns to her tent and gathers her sons. We leave the day after tomorrow. We go east as your grandfather always planned. What if they follow us? Jan asks. What if they destroy the wells? Then we dig new ones, KETURAH says firmly. We find new water. We survived. Because that's what we do. But that night, she allows herself to feel the full weight of terror. She's leading 6 young boys into territory she barely knows, with resources that might be sabotaged toward a future utterly uncertain. She lights her lamp and unfolds Abraham's letter, trying to absorb courage from the dead. But the dead stay silent, and outside she can hear voices. Young men talking loudly about how to protect Isaac's interests in the East. The next morning, a delegation arrives. 5 men led by one of Isaac's advisors. They don't ask permission. They simply push into her tent. We're here to inspect what you're taking, the leader announces, and to make sure you're not stealing what belongs to Isaac's household. Everything I have was given to me by Abraham, KETURAH says, forcing her voice level. Witnessed and documented. Yes, well, Abraham was old, confused, perhaps too generous. The man picks up a bag of silver, weighs it. This seems excessive for a secondary wife and her children. Her sons watch, faces tight with anger and fear. Zimron's hands clench into fists. She catches his eye, shakes her head. Not now, not here. The men take their time confiscating items, pocketing things while pretending to inspect them. It's not about inventory, it's about humiliation, about making sure they understand they leave on sufferance with only what these men allow them to keep. When they finally leave KETURAH inventories, what remains? They've taken perhaps a quarter of what Abraham set aside. Not enough to her, but enough to hurt. Enough to send a message. You are not protected anymore. That afternoon, Rebecca comes alone, this time without her usual hostile edge. I didn't know they would do that, Rebecca says quietly. Take your provisions, but you didn't stop it either.
No, I didn't.
Because part of me believes they're right. She pauses, but another part wonders if I'm wrong, if we're all wrong, if the covenant really is bigger than we think. She pulls out a small bag, and this is from me, not from Isaac. Silver and grain hidden from inventory. Not much, but enough to replace some of what those men stole. KETURAH takes it stunned. Why? Because I'm not as sure as I pretend to be. Because maybe we need people like you to remind us that God is bigger than our fear. Rebecca's eyes glisten. Take the gift. Use it. And if you manage to build something good in the East, remember that not everyone here wanted you to fail. She leaves before KETURAH can respond. The final night arrives. KETURAH and her son sit together, surrounded by packed supplies, facing the terrifying threshold of departure. Tell us about grandfather, Shua asks quietly. KETURAH thinks, then speaks. Your grandfather was 140 years old when he married me. He'd already lived more than a lifetime. He had nothing left to prove. And yet, he chose to do one more hard thing, to try to repair what he'd broken with Hagar by doing better with us. He didn't have to, but he chose to try. Did he succeed? Zimran asks. I don't know, Keturah admits. He gave you blessing and provision. He honored you publicly. But you're still leaving. So, did he succeed? Partially, maybe imperfectly, certainly, but he tried. And that's what I want you to remember, that trying to do better, even when you can't do it perfectly, still matters. They sleep fitfully, waking to every sound. But the night passes quietly. Dawn breaks cold and pink. Keturah and her sons emerge to find Isaac waiting with a small group, servants who respected Abraham and 2 elders who look uncomfortable but determined. Isaac speaks formally. Zimran, Joshen, Medan, Midian, Ishbak, Shua, sons of Abraham by Keturah his wife, you leave today for the eastern territories, carrying the blessing of your father and the provision he set aside. You go not as exiles, but as sent ones, commissioned to carry Abraham's name to peoples we will never meet. He hands Zimran a sealed document. This letter identifies you as Abraham's sons to the merchants and tribal leaders in the east. It gives you standing legitimacy. Then quietly to Keturah, I'm sorry I can't do more. I'm sorry the blessing has to include departure. I'm sorry I'm not brave enough to let you stay. You're doing what you can, Keturah says softly. That's all anyone can do. They begin walking east. The sun rises behind them, casting their shadows long ahead. 7 figures moving toward horizon, toward uncertainty, toward blank spaces on the map where Abraham's covenant has yet to be tested. Behind them, Isaac stands watching until they disappear, and Keturah knows, without looking back, that he's weeping. Weeping for his father's complicated legacy, weeping for his own cowardice, weeping for the cost of covenant. They walk in silence for hours. Finally, as midday heat builds, Midian speaks. Mother, are we ever coming back? Keturah stops, turns to look at her 6 sons. They're dusty, tired, afraid, but still walking, still moving forward, still carrying Abraham's blessing even as they leave his camp behind. No, she says honestly, we're not coming back. But that doesn't mean we're lost, it means we're going. And sometimes going is its own form of arrival. They keep walking east toward wells they've never seen, toward peoples they've never met, toward a future that Scripture will barely mention, but that God apparently sees anyway. The landscape changes as they travel. The familiar hills of Hebron give way to flatter terrain, then 2 rocky outcroppings that look like the bones of the earth pushing through skin. They stop at midday to rest in whatever shade they can find, rationing water carefully, uncertain how far the first well lies. On the 3rd day, they see it. A stone marker Abraham placed years ago, indicating one of the wells he dug in preparation for this moment. Keturah's heart lifts as they approach. Then she sees the dirt, fresh dirt piled around the well opening. Someone has been here recently. Zimran runs ahead, looks down into the well and his face goes white. It's filled in. Someone collapsed it deliberately. The younger boys crowd around, staring down at the destroyed well. All that work, Abraham's foresight, his preparation, his attempt to make their journey easier, undone by men who couldn't bear the thought of these children succeeding. Keturah feels rage rise in her chest, hot and choking. But she forces it down, forces herself to think. They have water for perhaps 2 more days. They have tools, they have strong backs. Then we dig, she says simply. We dig until we find water again. And if they've destroyed the other wells too, we dig those as well. We will not die in the wilderness because frightened men try to erase us. They work through the afternoon, through the cooling evening, through the night by torchlight. The boys take turns, their hands blistering, their backs aching. Keturah works alongside them, refusing to rest while they labor. And finally, as dawn breaks on the 4th day, they hear it, the sound of water seeping into the bottom of the shaft. Not much at first, just a trickle, but enough. Enough to keep going, enough to survive. They collapse beside the well, exhausted, filthy, triumphant in a small and painful way. They have water, they have each other. They have Abraham's blessing, even if they had to fight for Abraham's provision. And as KETURAH watches the sun rise over this harsh and beautiful land, she thinks, this is what covenant looks like on the margins. Not easy, not comfortable, but real. Now as 3 years pass, 3 years of digging wells, establishing trade routes, learning the languages of the Eastern peoples. KETURAH's sons are no longer boys. Zimin is 15 now, tall and weathered beyond his years. They've built a small settlement around the wells Abraham designated. Wells they had to redig. Wells they had to defend. Wells now known throughout the Eastern territories as belonging to the sons of Abraham. It's not the inheritance Isaac received. It's not land flowing with milk and honey, but it's theirs and it's real. One evening as KETURAH sits watching the sunset, Shua comes running. Mother, someone's coming from the west. He carries a staff marked with grandfather's seal. An old servant arrives, dusty and exhausted. After drinking water he speaks. Isaac sent me. He pulls out a small scroll. The scribes have completed the official genealogy of Abraham. Isaac made sure your sons were included. Not in the margins this time. In the main text, Abraham took another wife whose name was KETURAH. She bore him Zimran, Joshan, Maiden, Midian, Ishbak, and Shua. It's there. Permanent witnessed. KETURAH unrolls the scroll with trembling hands. There it is. Her name, her sons' names, written in clear script, not equal to Isaac's line, perhaps not central, but present, acknowledged, remembered. Isaac wanted me to tell you something, the servant continues. He said, tell KETURAH that I finally understand what my father was trying to teach me, that the covenant is not diminished by inclusion, that God's blessing is not a limited resource that must be hoarded. Tell her I'm sorry it took me so long to learn. The servant pulls out another bag, and he sent this more silver, more provisions, not as charity, but as inheritance owed. Why now? KETURAH asks quietly. Why, after 3 years, the servant's face softens. Because Isaac's grandson was born, and Isaac held that baby and realized he wanted that child to grow up knowing the full story. Not the edited version, the real story with all its mess and pain and difficult grace. Before he leaves the next morning, KETURAH gives him a seed from Sarah's garden, one she's carefully preserved. Give this to Isaac. Tell him I've planted the other seeds here in the east. Tell him Sarah's garden is growing in soil she never saw, tended by hands she never acknowledged, blooming in a land the covenant promise never included. Tell him that's what grace looks like. The servant takes the seed carefully. He'll understand. I think he's finally ready to understand. Her sons gather around her. What does it mean? Madan asks. That we're in the record now. KETURAH thinks carefully. It means that what happened to us, the blessing and the displacement, the honoring and the sending away, all of it will be remembered. Future generations will read about Abraham's life and they'll stumble over our names. They'll have to ask, who were these sons? Why were they blessed and then sent east? What's the answer? Zimran asks. Maybe the answer is different for everyone who asks, KETURAH says. But maybe that's the point, that we're in the story specifically to complicate it, to remind people that God's ways are wider than human categories. Over the following months, word spreads about the sons of Abraham. Traders seek them out for fair dealing. 3 of the brothers take wives from the Eastern peoples. KETURAH watches as her sons become fathers themselves, as her grandchildren are born into this Eastern world carrying Abraham's name and their mother's heritage. 5 years after the messenger came, KETURAH climbs a hill overlooking their settlement. From here she can see the wells they've defended, the growing community, the trade caravans connecting them to peoples across the Eastern territories. It's not Hebron, it's not the land of promise, it's not the center of anything, but it's alive, it's growing, it's real. She thinks of Hagar standing in wilderness and wondering if being seen by God was enough when being included by people was denied. She thinks of Ishmael's descendants, becoming 12 princes just as God promised, existing powerfully outside the official narrative, as she realizes the margins are where God does some of his most interesting work. The center is essential. Isaac's line will carry the covenant forward through history, but the margins matter too. The sent ones matter because they prove that God's mercy is wider than human fear, that his covenant can be specific without requiring everyone else to be erased. She pulls out the scroll. traces her name, KETURAH. It means incense, fragrant, rising, impossible to contain, spreading wherever wind carries it. A sunset paints the sky gold and crimson. Her sons join her on the hill. 6 men now, strong and capable, fathers themselves, carrying Abraham's name into territories he never imagined. Tell us again, Midian says quietly. Tell us what grandfather said before he died. KETURAH smiles. Wider than we know, always wider. What did he mean? He meant that every time we think we've understood the full scope of God's covenant, we discover it's bigger than we thought, more inclusive, more generous. He meant that being sent isn't the same as being abandoned. That existing at the edges doesn't mean existing outside of God's care. She turns to face them fully. You were born into complication. You were blessed and displaced, honored and sent away, included in the record and excluded from the center. And that's exactly what makes your story important. You're proof that God's covenant doesn't fit in the boxes we build for it. Your evidence that mercy is wider than we're comfortable with. The stars emerge. Those same stars Abraham saw when God promised descendants too numerous to count. And KETURAH realizes that her sons are part of that count. They exist in the margins of Scripture, mentioned briefly and then passed over, but they exist nonetheless, and that is enough. Your grandfather tried to do better, she tells her sons. He failed in many ways, but he tried. And because he tried, you exist. You carry his name. You build nations he never saw. You prove that covenant can expand without breaking. That blessing can be shared without diminishing. She speaks the words that have sustained her through exile and building, through rejection and survival. You are not forgotten. You are not less. You are sent. And that is sacred. The 6 brothers stand with her under emerging stars, sons of Abraham by KETURAH his wife. Builders of nations, no one will count, but God will remember. Evidence that the covenant is wider than we know, always wider. In Hebron 500 meters west, scribes continue copying Abraham's genealogy, and every time they write, Abraham took another wife whose name was KETURAH. They preserve a story the official narrative wanted to forget. They ensure that future generations will stumble over these names and have to ask, who were they? Why does their story matter? And perhaps some will understand what Abraham learned too late, what Isaac learned slowly, what KETURAH carried in her body and taught her sons. That God's mercy refuses our categories, that his covenant includes what we try to exclude, that the margins are holy ground, too. Sometimes the greatest acts of faith happen not at the center of the story, but at its edges where the forgotten build nations, where the sent ones become fathers of multitudes, where the briefly mentioned become eternally remembered by the God who sees everything, forgets nothing, and calls all of it, the central and the marginal, the chosen and the sent, the honored and the displaced, by the same beautiful impossible name. Beloved, KETURAH's story is for everyone who has been called secondary, for everyone whose name didn't make the main record, for everyone sent away but not abandoned. God's covenant is not a narrow gate that crushes, it is a wide door that includes. And if you remembered the 6 sons of a Canaanite wife, Scripture barely named, he remembers you. You are not forgotten. You are not less. You are sent. And that is sacred. If this story gave you hope, subscribe, turn on the bell, and share it with someone who needs to know. God's mercy is wider than our categories. Always has been, always will be.